So following on from the balancing the archetypes video, of which there's a lot more to go on that, by the way, because it's an absolutely huge subject, I want to break down the role of the magician that's symbolized by the tarot card, which is attributed up here to this particular path. And then later on, we'll look at the Fool as well, and then the relationship between those two things, and then applications from there on in, assuming there's sufficient interest. So now the Magician is quite a complex collection of archetypes, and this is where it does get a bit complicated. You see, a lot of the archetypal expressions themselves are a composite of lots of other archetypes as well. And a lot of archetypes combine to create a particular personification and objectification and so forth. Allow me to explain. So the Magician is the individual who has mastered the balance of the four elements and manages to hold them in equal balance. And the four elements being earth, air, fire, and water. And there's a lot of other stuff as well. I'm just keeping it nice and simple now. So we're just looking at the four elements aspect, none of the other lots and lots of other bits too. So the Magician is able to hold earth, air, fire, and water in balance. Now these are largely symbolic representations. They're not the literal like soil in the ground and fire that you get in the fireplace. These are symbolic elements. They're quite deep in terms of their attributions as well. So fire is largely it's destructive force, it's dynamism, it's action, it's the will, it is momentum, it's force, it's action upon the world. Seagulls have just joined us. Air is largely about consciousness and the intellect. Earth is about the physical world, physical manifestation. And water is about emotions and the emotive world and the more sort of creative force. Sexuality fitting in there quite nicely too for its creativity. The literal creativity, not sort of artistic expression. Now, there's lots more into those. These are like very broad categories. The Magician is able to have four of those in balance with each other. For example, some people are highly somatic. They're very slightly self-obsessed. They might even be slightly hypochondriac, quite vain, be very prone to plastic surgery, and upset. Their whole world is about their appearance. They might dye their hair blonde, but not necessarily have particularly high level of academic leanings and educational backdrop. If I would use the stereotype of the blonde bimbo, for example. So that's what we have there, is somebody who's very much out of balance in that air, the intellect, is slightly lacking, and there's an emphasis much more towards the physical. Now, some people are highly, highly emotional, more so they operate. I know coaches and therapists like this. They speak their truth from their heart. Their truth is the most important thing. And actually, they can't differentiate between fact, truth, and how they're feeling in the moment. And so their opinions and facts change according to how they feel. That's much more into the element of water, not so much towards the air intellect element. Some people are very forceful by nature. They're doers. They're people of action. Now, they could be a person of action who also is physically well developed and physically capable, but not so hot on the emotional side of stuff. Not so hot on the creative and thinking for oneself side of stuff. They're the military grunt who you can send out to go and get the dirty job done, and he does it very, very well following orders, but doesn't think for himself. Again, so we have two elements here combining in strength to the detriment of two others, but their detriment, of course, is the strength to the others. So there's lots of ways you can combine and change the balancing of these four elements to give you lots of variables. And in the magical training, the magical work of ritual magic, meditation, philosophical discourse, all the stuff that we do in the lodges, what we're trying to do is find a balance within ourselves. One of the most common mistakes that apprentices within magical lodges make, they seek to only develop their strengths and really try and ignore the weaknesses. There's an ego indulgence where people have this notion of an idealized self, and they want to be that rather than confront and deal with who they really are. And we see a lot of this in the personal development world as well, and the alphabet therapies, where essentially people start off learning some really decent skill sets that can help a lot of people and create transformation in a lot of people's lives. And yet some of the people that engage in the training of these skill sets end up becoming quite egotistical, quite egomaniacal, delusional a lot of the time. And they don't seem to be benefiting from the work that they're learning to do. And it's because they're not focusing on the real self. They're just inflating their notion of their idealized self and aren't dealing with the reality of who they are. Now, in magical work, there's the journey into the darkness, the delving into one's own psyche to look at all of the slightly less salubrious aspects of who we are, both at an identity level and also behavioral level, taking responsibility for how we have been, who we have been, and what we have been, and how we're going to be, who we're going to be, and what we're going to be, and how we will behave later on. And so largely we're having to confront an awful lot of stuff in ourselves that isn't very nice. And a lot of people would obviously prefer to avoid that, and that's completely understandable. Now, part of the initiatory process, of course, is to give people enough preparatory experiences that they can undertake those aspects of work, which are graded. There is a sequence to it, a logic to it. The initiatory process is graded to give people preparation to be able to handle those things. Because the last thing you want to do is take somebody who's, say, physically a little bit vulnerable, emotionally a little bit vulnerable, not doing so well, and get them straight into the hardcore stuff. Let's start off sorting out the physical, easy stuff first and incrementally get to the deeper level thing. Now, the magician, or the magus up here, is the person who has accomplished the balancing of those four elements within themselves. And most importantly, they're able to take a meta position to the rule structure here, that governs everything else. This is the ability to know when to break the rules ethically. And oddly enough, I'm reading Jordan Peterson's new book at the moment, and he's got a whole chapter on exactly this principle. And it's a fascinating book to read. It's 12 More Rules for Life. Highly recommended, because he actually outlines this particular process or particular aspect very, very clearly, probably better than I can. So the magician is able to understand that the rules are very, very useful governances for populations and for individuals. They're very useful to help discipline, regulate, and so forth, to actually maintain some kind of order. But blind acceptance of all rules, you end up with the job's worth. You end up with the petty-minded individual who has no flexibility and has no creative thought. All they're able to do is follow exact rules, regardless of whether it's appropriate to apply or not. And anyone that's worked in any institution or organization with enough people in it, you've met those people that are utterly, utterly inflexible. Now, if I look back on myself, years back, I was disregarding over all rules because I saw those personalities, especially at the hospital. Now, of course, I'm older, a little bit more right-wing leaning as a result. I'm able to see how important it is to have some of those jobs worth. Otherwise, you have a department made up entirely of people like I was. You have chaos, and there is no stability in organization because everyone's just winging it on what they think is right at the time. And I actually, one point, I made a mistake. This was fortunately, it got detected at the very last second, but I nearly killed a patient by giving them the wrong blood. And I 100% knew what I was doing. I knew I was breaking the rules. I knew everything I was doing was against the policy and process, but not only was I so convinced I was correct, I actually managed to rope in a doctor and a senior nurse to go along with my scheme. And it was only at the last second that I thought, okay, let's just do one final check, and realized, oh, slightly awkward. And yeah, it was not a good day in Andy's life, and not a good day in the life of those other two people either, who had gone along with my ridiculous schemes. This was, I was probably at 23, 24 at the time. Now, so it's having the wisdom to be able to transcend those rules, to know when they're not to be applied, but also knowing when the rules are to be applied. And that's why the magician up here is above Bina or above Saturn, simply because everything governs top down. And so it's slightly above, just above this rule structure, this imposition of structuring. So that's a key element or key aspect of the Magus. Now, in the tarot cards, you'll see the classic representation either as a juggler, and this is actually the combination of the Magus card and the Fool combined are the Joker card in the traditional playing card deck. But actually in the tarot deck, the concepts are separated out into two things. So classically, it's either juggling, and there's a table with 4 elemental weapons on it, and typically also pointing up to the sky and down to the ground in a particular pose known as the Magician pose, or there's another name for it, I forget. Now that's the Hermetic principle, as above, so below, which is essentially the magical position that everything on the inside of my head, everything of my psyche, of me, is a reflection of the universe. Everything of the universe is a reflection of me. When I move through the universe, I'm moving through my own experience. When I make changes inside myself, the universe correspondingly changes too. When the universe changes, I change too. So it's the magic mirror where everything is a reflection of everything else. So the magician brings changes in the universe by changing himself, or brings changes himself by changing the universe, or a combination thereof. Now, in a weird kind of way, most of us have had this experience. The world I live in today is very, very different to the one I was living in at the weekend following my COVID vaccination. I had a bit of a reaction to it, as I understand a lot of people have had. Wasn't a pleasant way to spend the weekend, I have to say. So the world physically, the world is still the same place, but my experience of it is massively transformed by the mental state that I was in as a result of the vaccination. When I was depressed, the world I lived in was very, very different. I perceived the whole thing. The world feels different. The world seems to be different. That is a classic thing, that changing myself changes the universe. Then times in my life where I've not been doing so well emotionally, and I've moved, found new relationships, got a new job, changed my lifestyle, everything feels different now, and the whole world is different. The world is pretty much the same as it was before. So that's changing environment, changing the world in order to change what's happening on the inside. So there is a degree of actual reality that most people can connect to of this. In the magic philosophy, of course, we're taking that to a much greater extreme. And this is where you find the delusional stuff that starts to creep in for some people with the magical thinking, where you have people who think they can do remote healing or distance healing because they make the pictures and emotions in their mind, and they can conduct across time and space and change forces in the world. Referenced in the other video, I know a guy who actually believes he's doing this and saving the world from COVID. Used to be quite an intelligent fella as far as I could tell, now absolutely bonkers delusional. And there's no shadow of a doubt in my mind he 100% believes what he's doing. And I also don't doubt it reflects his internal experience too of what's happening. Yet, of course, is anything happening in the universe? Is he really saving the world? Can the angry dwarf in South Croydon really cure cancer using his new code NLP? I doubt it. I speak it, therefore it happens. This is the magical thinking, where everything actually is very imbalanced, and it's an indulgence of ego rather than balancing out of aspects of self. Now, the principles by which this works on the Magus card, there's classically a table with 4 elemental weapons, and these are. Let's just flip this over. These are the sword or the dagger, the pentacle, the wand, and the cup. And they are also indicative of the elements. So discs represent, or the pentacles represents the element earth, which is to the north. The colour for that is increasingly these days is green, but it's usually black, russet, citron, and green. It's a combination of four colours. But people are increasingly using just green as an acceptable representation in lodge work and that kind of stuff. Wands are representative of fire, colour being red, and that's to the south. Swords or daggers being to the east, I've got it here in black, but it actually should be yellow. Sometimes it's in light blue, or sometimes light blue and yellow. And that's very much into the east. That's intellect and air. So that's swords. And then you have cups over there to the west, which is in blue. Easy, that's water. So now, in a ritual setting, in the magical working space, now you have your 4 elements of the 4 cardinal directions. You have color schemes accordingly for that. You'll have the various invocations of the entities, archangels, other archetypes that you would invoke into those areas too. So they become composites of collections of archetypes that symbolize those things. So the visualization build-up that people do is quite potent. It takes quite a lot of learning to do, and a lot of memorization and a lot of familiarity. Now let me just show you what some of these implements look like. Here we have a classic dagger. This is actually a Masonic poniard that works perfectly for my purpose. I think actually this is a Knights Templar Masonic one. Now what we have, this is a dagger, but we tend to use the word swords to indicate to the east. Now the sword, the ceremonial sword, is distinctly different from the ceremonial dagger. When we refer to swords as being the element of air, this is actually what we're talking about, not the full-blown sword. The sword is a separate elemental weapon that is used within the ceremony, but it's not used within these 4 elements. It has a meta position to the 4 elements. I'll save that one for another day. I don't actually have the swords here. They're currently lodging elsewhere for other reasons. Ceremonial reasons, not for legal reasons. If we look at wands, you get different types of wand, and people also have different types of dagger, by the way. It doesn't really matter what the dagger is. In theory, you're supposed to make this yourself. Some people will have a much broader blade. The reason being is they'll inscribe it, paint it, or etch it. Sometimes this is actually painted as well. Often it's red, of course. Sorry, no, it's blue and yellow. I'm sorry. It's the wand that's often red. And so people will engrave the relevant names and words of power and associations on and their own personal motto and so forth. I don't tend to do that. If we look at the wands, again, lots of different variations on the wand. This is the one I tend to use. It's just a stick. Now, different traditions prescribe different methods by which it's made, how it's inscribed, what it's made from. This is just a piece of willow that I've cut and sanded down, and it works perfectly for my purposes. I have others. Here is one that's been used from a Solomonic working. It's got some god names painted on it. This is black. This is also made from, I can't remember which wood this was now, whatever was the prescribed thing. This has to be cut at a certain time of day, on a certain day of the year, in a certain manner. It has to be done, produced, then created in a particular ceremonial fashion, and so forth. All of these things have methodology by which they're supposed to be made and consecrated and so forth. The reason being is that this is just a stick, right? This was growing off a tree, and now it's just a stick. But in my internal world, in my ceremony that I'm going to do, whether it's a solo working or with other people, this must be more than a stick. It must be my will. It must be my force of action. It must be my directed attention and determination. Just like a child learns to point, and the power of that point, everyone looks at what the child's pointing out, and the child goes, "That!" And everyone goes, "Yes!" The child learns the power of the point, and that's largely what we're doing here. So it's a directed attention, but also this is symbolic of my will, of my ability to create change and force and action in the world. I know it's just a stick, right? We don't have to get deluded with this kind of stuff. This one has a slightly different function. Well, it's within that same domain, of course, because it still represents the same thing. But the flavor. So I've got generic tools, and then we've got ones that are very, very specific. And this is for the drawing spirits into crystals work. Save that one for another day. In fact, I probably won't. It's too weird and abstract for what our purpose is here, I think. So you get different types of wand. This one's painted black for its principal purpose, but others will be painted in red. They'll be inscribed with the relative things as well. Some people actually have a fire wand, so they'll make it look like fire. Some people I've seen, they make it like a bolt of lightning. I love that. People have their own style, and ultimately that's what people are going to do. You've got to make your wand. Now, before I go on to the other two, here's the thing to be aware of. When you make your wand, when you make any of the tools, this is largely a symbolic and also slightly alchemical process. The alchemists were working with physical material in trying to perfect nature. And actually what they're really doing is having a physical representation as a metaphor for internal change work that they're doing as well. When you make your wand and perfect it, you are making and perfecting your will. To know what you are, to know your true will, to know your mission on this planet, to know why you're here and what is your purpose for living is the hardest thing. When you have answered that question and have got that aligned with who you actually are, you've got it aligned with your DNA, you're living your true purpose, you have symbolically made your wand, and that's what that would represent. It's not that you're perfecting this in the physical world. This is symbolic of the perfected will of yourself, if that makes sense. Now we have the pentacle. Sometimes it's pentacle. It is slightly different. You get lots of different pentacles for different things. So you've got planetary pentacles. The pentacle is the overarching disc, which is is representative of the element of earth. This is my physical body, my physical world. It's misattributed to the planet Earth, because on the Tree of Life, you've got all the planetary attributions. Malkuth at the bottom, go, well, that's very earthy, isn't it? That's why we put the planet Earth. It's not. The physical body of any planetary body is the earthy manifestation of it. So this is the earthy manifestation of the universe itself. So this is the physical world. It is also my physical body. Now, how people make these, there's different types. So here's a classic one from the Golden Dawn. It's painted in the traditional four colours of Earth, and it's got the Hebrew names of Malkuth inscribed around the outside there. These are quite easy to make, actually. You can just print it off and stick it on a piece of wood if you wanted to do it that way, then varnish it. Or we have this one, which is made, I can't say what it's made from, actually. This is following a magical secret formula, which is representative of my I can't even say now, my physical body, as well as my physical life and my physical world. That's what this represents. And there's it's been quite a complex process in creating this. It doesn't look that particularly pleasing, but it works. I've got to say, because of what I had to do to make this works perfectly symbolically for me. Another variation on this one, I've not actually inscribed this one. I made this for a client who then, anyway, that was from a long time ago. This was for this is lead. This is just pure lead. This is made for a Saturn working, lead being the elemental or the metallic attribution to Saturn. So that would be inscribed with the relevant things of Bina and Saturn. Whereas this one is the generic physical manifestation of the universe. This would be a very specific portion of that manifestation. So it's a planetary manifestation of the planet Saturn. That's what would be used. That's what that would represent. And so we have lots of different planetary pentacles as well that have much more refined, specific identification. So that when I'm waving that around in a ceremony, or it's being utilized as a symbol within a ceremony, my mind is focusing on that aspect of manifestation, the Saturnic Bina, as opposed to the generic physical universe. So a lot of the magical tools, they're also called magical weapons, which I think thinks a bit silly. We can refine it down to be symbolic of very, very specific things. Number as well is used, so we get number squares and stuff like that. So we can reduce things down to very, very specific, quantifiable concepts. rather than have to explain the concept to everybody present what we're talking about, because everyone in that ceremony knows those concepts because they've studied the material, they know it inside out. When we refer to that particular thing by its symbol, everyone has an intimate connection to what that represents without lengthy explanations. So it's a way of reducing down explanation of stuff, and we can internally manipulate symbols and symbolic representations. And then last but no means least, we then have cups, symbolic of water. I've got lots of these actually for, again, different purposes. This is just my generic cup. It's just a silver thing I found in an antique shop one day. Find these all over the place, actually. Charity shops have them. Again, some people paint these. They will be painted blue and then inscribed and painted with the relevant names and words. I don't bother. I don't need that sort of thing for what I do. And so that works for me. So now on the altar, if there's interest, I'll do another video on the representation of the altar, what it means, what it represents, what you can do with that altar. These would be placed accordingly in the. So we've got a square altar. Obviously, your discos that are opposite the wand and so forth, and then they can be picked up and utilized as a symbolic representation of that. So the magician has made and perfected those elemental tools, those elemental weapons, which are symbolic of his internal workings and perfection of that aspect of self. One of my observations of too many coaches and therapists is they are intellectually lazy. They're focused way too much on making money. They're focused way too much on getting that fictional six-figure client and showing off how much income they're making as they're living the dream because they're a life coach. Discs being money as well, coins, that's their focus is very much into the material. My observation is, though, some of those people do make money. And my other observation is I know I would be a lot richer if I dumbed down what I taught. If I dumbed down my work sufficiently and focused much more into satisfying people's material requirements, material needs, and material emotions, I would get a lot more sales. But I'm not prepared to do that, because for me it is all about maintaining some kind of standard, but also a balance as well. Now, you have the other end of the thing, so you find people who are incredibly intellectual, and they have perfected. They understand a lot of good stuff, and yet get them to actually put some work in. They can't do it. They can't actually make that move to put the physical work in. So they're lacking, they're lacking the will, but they're also not focusing on the material either. They may well be, very balanced in their emotions with the work that they've learned. So therapists really could benefit, I think, from understanding these four different concepts too, bringing them into balance and understanding the nature of these different things. Now, I've just given really a very brief overview of these four elements and the elemental weapons. There's so much more to this. Do I want to turn this into a magical training? Probably not. If people want to know more and understand how this works, I would recommend you join a society, join one of the magical lodges. If people want to do that, just message me. I can connect you to. There's groups absolutely everywhere. Quality varies. It has to be said, the group is only as good as the members meeting in that particular lodge, and the addition or subtraction of just one individual can make or break it. I was in a Ordo Templi Orientis lodge locally here. When I joined, I could not believe my luck. The strength of the group of people that were there, their level of experience and knowledge, and my goodness, these were grade A students all the way through their lives and everything they've ever done. These were super smart people with high levels of experience. I learned so much from them. And then the couple who were running that particular group, they were relationship, they broke up. Somebody died. Somebody moved away. The whole thing fell apart. So whilst that lodge still functions, it has lost the brilliance that it once had, simply because there was a change in the dynamics. That's always going to be the problem. So if you ever join a group, you think, oh my God, these people are weird. Okay, then just leave. You may well have to shop around quite a few in order to find one. And then you join one is not necessarily going to say that that's how it's always going to be. So be prepared to be fairly fluid, I think, in your loyalties to some of these groups, because don't stick around when it becomes a bit culty-like or a little bit too serious as well, which is, well, that can happen. Or they just degenerate into a pub meet, and it's all about looking cool in the pub. Seen that happen a few times. No interest in that kind of nonsense at all, although there was a time in my life where I would have been. So just be aware that the quality varies enormously, much like in any of the therapy groups too. You get different personalities with different things. Not everyone that comes into this kind of work is interested in creating balance for themselves. A lot of people like the fashion. For a lot of people, it's just a hobby. And a lot of people just don't get it. Like, say, the NLP practitioners who become completely egotistical maniacs. They fail to apply the work in an appropriate way to themselves, but they can't see it. They can't see it. You see the same thing with the magical groups as well. The one group I do recommend, it's I've got the flag down there, the Modern Mixed Mason group. I'll put that in the description. They run public meetings every Tuesday. Anyone can come along, even if you're not a member of the Masonic group. They have some of the most astonishingly intellectual, clever, experienced people in terms of magic that I've come across. Most Masonic groups don't have a magical orientation. The Modern Mixed Mason group very much has so, because some of its members are just quite extraordinary human beings, I have to say. So I highly recommend that. I think that's all I'm going to talk about for now. If people do want the specific instructions of how you make and perfect your magical tools, let me know in the comment section, and I will see what I can do in future videos.